My name is Mark Bateman. I'm both co-founder and CEO here at WeQual, and have the extraordinary joy of running many of these sessions. We have a big team behind, without which none of this would be possible. The whole focus really of the month of November on our WeQual Executives program is really exploring boards, and from two specific angles. What does it take maybe to join a board? What is it that boards look for? And then secondly is, how do you show up as a senior leader inside your organization when you're engaging with a board, whether you're presenting data, pulling together data, maybe you sit on a committee of some kind, maybe you're in a lift with a board member for 30 seconds, what is it you say? Or if you're actually engaging with the board. And so I have the extraordinary joy this morning of having Mark Cutifani with us. Mark was formerly the CEO at Anglo America, which is where we got to know him. He's been a great supporter of WeQual, was an interviewer for the WeQual Awards, which was a process to identify at the time women who should be sat on group executive committee roles within listed companies. So Mark is a 4-time chair and CEO, former CEO of Anglo American, as I've said, current chairman of Vale Base Metals, globally recognized for leading major mining organizations since 2006. Now, he won't say this himself, but he has been dubbed the patron saint of mining. I know a little bit more about him as well because I interviewed him for my book, Disruptive Leadership. Now, Mark brings rare insider perspectives on what chairs and CEOs value the most in both executive and boardroom performance. Now, to frame this conversation, I just want to share one slide. And this is a useful slide when you're thinking about your own board. You can also apply it to your own executive committee in terms of identifying the level of maturity that that board is operating at. So I'm going to show that here. The board maturity levels, feel free to take a screenshot, but primarily I see there are 3 board maturity levels or different levels that boards are operating at. The first at the bottom there is level 1, where the board is primarily concerned with safety. And by safety, I don't just mean fatalities, which I'm sure Mark may be talking to, but actually the safety of the business as a whole. Detail heavy, risk averse, potentially defensive. And the question tends to be, are we getting it right, leading to maybe more binary answers. Level 2 board is really more focused on strategy. It tends to be looking more up and outwards. Where is the market going? What are our competitors doing? What are our customers needing? Maybe it's a little bit inconsistent, but the questions here, are we doing the right thing? That's a very different type of question. Level 3 is the legacy board, very future orientated, asking more courageous, potentially more courageous long-term questions where the answers are maybe not quite so binary. It tends to be much more purpose and values led. So what is right for the future? So within that context, let me stop sharing there. Again, Mark, a pleasure, sir. Are you ready?
Yep, pleasure to be here. Thanks, Mark.
My pleasure. So I'm going to go straight in. I think a lot of us, when we're thinking about the board, wonder how we should show up. And what I'm interested in is, what is your early experience or turning point that most shaped how you show up in a boardroom?
There are lots of stories I can tell about hard lessons that I've learned, but the one lesson or the person that taught me the toughest lessons in my first experiences on a board was a guy called Reg Fraser, who was one of the old style mining leaders, tough as nails, and he was on the Savage Resources board. So he knew me when I literally started straight out of high school at Kembla Coal and Coke, and he saw me over a number of years, and I went one way, he went the other, and we ended up coming back together, me as a chief operating officer for Savage, and he was on the board. And in the first 3 minutes of my first presentation, I made reference to the board and shareholders as stakeholders in the business. And I thought I was going to get my head ripped off. He said, the board and the shareholders are not stakeholders. Let me tell you, he said, they've put the capital in, they own the business. And the conversation went a little bit longer than that. But it was actually a really important point to make. And as I shared, Mark, you and I've chatted about this before.
Yeah.
I was to learn through hard experiences, employees aren't stakeholders either. They are the business. And if you're talking to a local community member and you call them a stakeholder, they will be rightly offended as well, because in a mine, we're working on their land, and that's either First Nations or local communities, which in my view are equally important in terms of those conversations. And when you go through all of the relationships you have as a business, the minute you refer to one as a stakeholder, you risk offence, because in the end they each have their own perspective on that relationship. So it was not only a board lesson, it was a much broader lesson that I was to learn relatively quickly. And Reg was the first guy that really set me up. The second thing was, be prepared for questions from all perspectives, and be open, and be open and constructive. Don't ever be defensive in board conversations, because the minute you're defensive or not constructive, people wonder if there's something else.
Right. I know in our preparation, I was so surprised myself when you talked through specifically the stakeholders' perspective, and I can see, knowing you a little bit as well, how that has shaped how you've engaged with communities, as well as everybody else that you might expect. But the thing that really does stand out to me is, I guess this is why they've called you the patron saint of mining, which is that you're not treating local communities as stakeholders. You're treating them as owners of the land. And that second part, being open to any question, being constructive and not defensive, I think goes to the heart actually of the psychology of operating at a board level, which is you're not doing it to prove or to perform, but you're being present, right? And being present allows you to be open. So what is it you believed about boards that turned out not to be true once you were actually inside the room?
In many cases, board members are drawn from many walks of life. And so my assumption, again, pretty naive, I guess, in starting out, was the board actually understood the business, and most people on the board understood the business. In reality, I found out that most actually don't understand the business. And so be careful not to assume too much knowledge. And I don't mean that in an insulting way, but you will know more than 99.9% of the board members
This is so
that you come
important.
into touch with.
Yeah.
And so don't assume great knowledge of the business, but do assume that they've got broader knowledge that they bring to those conversations. And so there's a difference between the two. And that was, again, another important lesson that I understood. So it makes you think about the way they're asking questions. And it's important that you might have to explain a few points more than you might have otherwise thought. But at the same time, try to make sure you hear the three dimensions of the questions you're being asked.
And can I follow? I'd love to ask a follow-up question on that, because so many people that are listening today are probably not serving on a board, and if they are, maybe it's a smaller board. And so when they're thinking about boards, we're thinking about those big boards of big global listed companies. So this big learning of yours that actually board members don't know the business. How did that show up for you, maybe in your very first interaction with a board?
As simple as using terms or slang terms of the vernacular in
Right.
the mining industry, most people don't actually understand what you're talking about.
Right.
And because the mining industry is quite different, technical specificity quite important, and your assumption that people understand what you're talking about is a real mistake to make. And so, having thought about what you want to say, or having been clear about what you want to say, you have to give equal thought to how you say it. How you say it is really important, because you've got to think about the experience and the knowledge base of the board members, and how do you land that conversation
Mm,
so you're not insulting those that do understand, and you're not dumbing down the conversation in a way that's insulting to others. So it's a balance, but
mm.
thinking about how you say what you're going to say is really important.
I think that leads nicely on to the next question then, which is what do executives do that makes a board immediately trust them? And what behaviors maybe erode that trust quickly?
Transparency, I think, is
Mm,
really important, and um, being open to the good, the bad, and the ugly. And in fact, I think it's better to focus on the things you're not getting right than the
mm.
things you are getting right. So yes,
Ooh.
it's important to acknowledge the good points, but it's more important to flag those things that aren't going as well as you would like, and to be open around what you're doing about it, and also be open to input and questions on those points in particular. And consistent with that, if you're asked a question and you don't know, fess up straight away. Don't fake it. The one thing about board members is they may not know the business, but the reason they're probably on the board is they know human nature, and they
Yeah.
can probably pick someone that's faking it pretty quickly. So don't even try it. Don't go
So
there. Be open and honest.
this for me is so central, because in coaching so many leaders that are going to be presenting to the board, there is this psychological need to feel safe. And so I'm going to show up to the board. I need to demonstrate that I know what I'm doing, right? That I'm a worthwhile leader with the title that I have inside this organization. I'm presenting to you, the board. Everything in me wants to show you the best side of me personally, right? Without even realizing it. So that perfectionist, that how do I make sure the data's right? I need to know every answer. I need to know every single data point to show the best of. And what you've just said is no, that's the absolute opposite, actually, of, in a sense, of what a board's looking for. It's acknowledging what's not working, which potentially shows me in a poorer light. How do you deal with that difference?
Yeah, and you made me reflect a second on something I did probably quite naturally. I would do a chief executive's report to the board, which was written. And for me, and when I started at Anglo, for example, there was a sort of 2-page report that was done. It was almost just a travel log of what the CEO had done in the previous 2 months. And for me, it was very important to look at the strategy, the business plan, and all the things we said we're going to do. So I do a written report against the key accountabilities, a picture and a few words, and focusing on some good points and some points that need correction.
Mm,
But when I talked to that report, I took the report as read. The more positive elements were there, but I focused on the issues that weren't quite right or needed addressing, or the issues of risk. And so the dialogue was around the matters that needed to be corrected, and that you could engage the board on. You're looking for their advice. They didn't need to be lectured on how good you were or how
right,
good you thought you were. It was
right.
better to give them all the data, positive and negative, and then the conversations were more focused around what we needed to address, because you're looking to draw their inputs
Right.
and their experience into the conversation. And
Yeah.
I think that naturally got the right balance in the conversation generally. And quite often they say, look, that's a good outcome or something like that, and that's
Right.
fine. But don't you be the one promoting all the good stuff. It's really your job is to talk about the things that you need to focus on as a team and where the challenges are, and draw their contribution. And they will feel a lot better about that conversation as board members as well, as a consequence.
And is this true of all boards? Because I don't know about those listening, but I'd be going, I don't want to be showing up to the board and almost washing the dirty laundry in public kind of thing. These are the things that are going wrong. It requires, I believe, a remarkable degree of self-confidence and of even willingness to be vulnerable in a setting where you could be harshly judged. So that to me then speaks about, again, the quality of the board, right? You're going to have some more mature boards that recognize and create space for, let's talk about what's not working, and we're not going to judge the executive or the leader that's presenting bad data, if you like, versus maybe a board that is more lacking confidence in itself, needs to get it right itself, so that more maybe that level one board where actually that psychological safety is not there. How would I as a leader show up in that situation? So I mean, the question that we had, if you remember, was, what advice would you give an executive facing a board that is divided, political, or stuck in its own echo chambers? And I think these two overlap.
So given that boards are made up of people,
Right. Something we
there's always
forget.
been an element of
Yep.
politics, different views, and there will be different views in the board. The key thing for the chairman to
Right.
do is to try and make sure that board members are heard, their questions are asked, and there's a constructive debate around those points, and that the chief executive's got the opportunity to answer the points and be part of a constructive dialogue. The first point, if you've got a difficult board, then I think it's really important for a chief executive to be able to have a conversation with the chair around the dynamics on the board. That's the first point. And again, I wouldn't go in and say to the chairperson, you're not doing a very good job, but it may be helpful to say, look, here's how I'm experiencing the board at the moment and the conversations. And then the chair will either respond or maybe hint that you might be part of the issue and hopefully give you some advice or otherwise. Right. But I think that's a really important point to make, is make sure that you've got a relationship and you're able to have a dialogue with the chairman about the dynamics of the board.
So this is where you're on. Sorry, this is where you're on the board. If you're the leader coming in to present and you recognize this is the situation, there's a somewhat dysfunctional board. How do you show up in that situation?
Good. So your sponsor.
Right.
So take it if you're a less senior executive or even someone going in for the first time. Who is your sponsor? Have the conversation about what dynamic you can expect.
Yeah. Exactly.
And if it's first time, they should try and give you tips on what to look for. The old hand signals. Too much, too little, watch for the hands, make sure you've got your codes worked out. Just simple stuff, and don't overdo it.
Yeah.
But in any situation, try and model the behavior you would expect of others. If under attack, if under pressure, model the behavior that you would hope to see from them. And you be respectful. If there's a question that's a bit difficult or you're not quite sure, ask for clarification. That's okay. Work it through. But be respectful and behave as you would have them behave with you. And in most cases, they'll adjust and correct, and responding or overreacting won't help you.
Right.
So keep your demeanor, be respectful, connect, and model the behavior you would expect from them. Because at the end of the day, the impression that you'll leave them with, if they're arguing, the impression they'll leave you with, well, you know what, they did a pretty good job in pretty difficult circumstances. But if you overreact, then you're part of the problem.
Right. So retain your agency, be constructive, stay transparent, and model the behaviors that you would want from others. But I love the sponsorship piece.
Prep. Yeah.
Right.
Do your prep
Exactly.
either with your sponsor or with the chair, and then debrief.
Yeah.
Because on the presumption you're going to be asked back.
After our preparation call at the beginning of this week, we did some live coaching sessions 2 days ago, again as part of executives, and one of the leaders said that they'd been brought into the board to present data and they didn't have a sponsor, and they were new in role. And I'm like, hey, no, that should not have happened. So exactly, if you're being asked to present to the board, make sure you have that sponsorship and do your preparation. So what are the 2 to 3 things a board needs from executives to make good decisions, and what should executives stop doing?
Yeah. Sorry. One other point I was going to make is in presenting, make sure you've got structure, your behaviour's right, and the information you're presenting has high integrity.
Right.
I think that's always something that'll drive boards nuts if the information you're presenting is incorrect. So make sure your information's right as well. So that's part of the last question. Then your point here is the structure and the way you put stuff, I think, is really important. And so how you connect it, how do boards set themselves up, and how do you connect to that is really important. So if an organisation has a purpose, ambition, values, strategy, business model, systems and structure, try and align yourself in the way you present to what you know is the formation that the organisation uses to have conversations. So get yourself aligned with those approaches will help. And where you have differences or where you're maybe challenging some wisdom inside those structures, then make sure that you're able to make 2 or 3 key points that might demonstrate where some nuances are required or changes are required. Right. So that point about having a structure, being very clear, and align the conversation with things they'll understand, and then where you're making different points, be clear on what your 2 or 3 points are for making that point.
Right. So there's a brevity there as well. So I love that, aligning what you want to say with really how the company's own framework for dealing with what are the purpose, vision, values, strategic objectives, that framework, and aligning it with that. And then what are your 2 to 3 points? What signals tell you the maturity of a board? And how should executives adapt their style accordingly? We've touched on some of this already, but
firstly, does the board listen? And do they give you time to explain or express yourself? And I think it's really important that boards are courteous, and particularly for young executives coming up. You know, the sort of the written, unwritten law is you give someone the opportunity, like your maiden speech in Parliament. You've got to be given the opportunity to lay out the whole conversation. I think that's really important and important for the confidence of an individual.
Yeah.
At some point, a mature board, in my experience, asks questions. And in asking questions, there's sometimes a coaching element to, well, what would you do if? And then the questions that follow may in fact be leading you towards a point they want to make, and it might be their point, or it might be an opportunity to make your point more forcefully.
Right.
So be open to being led in the conversation by questions. And people familiar with the coaching processes, you'll see quickly some board members ask 2 or 3 questions as a series, sort of taking you through the logic. And then you can get some really difficult characters on a board that ask a really weird or left field question. I've got a very good friend who I'm very close to, actually, one of my partners, who asks some really odd questions. But what he's doing is he's seeing how far you can step out in your logic from the conversation, but he's not necessarily after the answer.
Yeah, exactly.
He's after your logic trail.
Yes.
So be prepared for respectful questions, taking you through a logic with a bit of coaching in there, or the left field questions, which is about trying to work out how you think. So the point that we talked about earlier, know who is on the board is always helpful, and doing your homework in finding out what people's preferences or peccadillos are is always helpful, and know and try and have at least some sense of whether you're going to get left-wing lunatic questions, which is about just showing logic, or you're going to get a respectful questioning and you're going to get the opportunity to demonstrate your thinking. But doing a little bit of homework on the board and knowing what to expect so you're not surprised and you don't overreact either way. Yeah, sorry, go.
No, the thing that I...
Be present.
Be present. And what do you mean by be present? Because this is my favorite word at the moment. What do you mean by be present?
Listen and watch the body language, and as you answer the question, you can get a sense of whether it's landing. And if you think, gee, I'm missing this, ask for a clarification. Don't be scared to ask for a clarification. Because quite often, words are inefficient ways of messaging, and quite often the words don't actually reflect the real question.
Exactly.
Or there might be nuances in there that you might want to check on. So don't be scared to ask for a clarification. And again, if you've got a mature board, they'll give you room, they'll give you a bit of time. And if they're a not so mature board, I'd still look for the clarifications and be very careful on how far you're sort of wandering in the questioning, and probably shorten the answers if you've got a really difficult board.
Yeah. Right. That's good advice as well. For me, I like the way you really highlighted that being present part, because I think human nature is that we can panic. We can feel that we're under test in some way, right? That the board is looking for an opportunity to show that I'm failing in some way, right? There's those sort of inner fears, and being present is being able to put that to the side and to stay listening to the person who's in front of you asking the question. They're not trying to test you. They can see something maybe that you can't see, and they're wanting to help you through the journey of seeing it, or through a different set of eyes, which ultimately is what a board is there for. So great. I love that answer. So I've got 2 more questions, and then I'm going to go to questions. Boards increasingly expect executives to lead inclusively. What does inclusive leadership look like in practice, and especially under pressure?
First, whether you're an extrovert or an introvert as a leader, and that's about style and approach. There's no right answer either way, but what I would say, you need to be accessible as a leader. And by that I mean people need to know that if they need you, you're there. And I think it's also important to be engaging. So encouraging people to have the conversation, and even if they're not quite sure what the conversation would be, they shouldn't be intimidated or worried that you're going to judge, because it's about the issue that needs to be dealt with. And the importance of debate. And I'd always said, look, good news is great, but I don't need to hear it straight away. But if there's a problem, tell me, boom, let me know quickly.
Right.
And the way I explain it is, if you've got a problem and you're not sure of the answer, you're not the first person in the business that will have been confronted with that situation. The reason it's important to let us know is maybe we can help. Maybe we can help solve the problem and keep it as this instead of this.
Yeah.
And people being comfortable having the debate, particularly as an executive, is really important. And I used to do something that was quite probably difficult for some people, is I used to think aloud. Now I'm an extrovert,
Right.
surprise, surprise, and I
Never
think aloud. And I think aloud, which can be disconcerting.
Yes.
Because they're sort of sitting there, is he really going to? And then you'd get, no, that's a dumb idea. And they go, the deep breath, thank God he didn't go there. But what it does is help people hear the 4 or 5 points that I'm taking into account in getting to a position. And then it's actually quite funny, because it used to open up the debate.
Right.
Because somebody would disagree with me on one of my points, and then we might go back the other way. But it was quite deliberate at times, and then quite natural on a really sticky problem. I'd probably do it, and I'd look around the room for reactions. As an introvert, my advice, and I've got friends and, again, some very close colleagues who are introverts, they've got to work harder. And they don't have to do the flapping their gums bit that I do. But I said, then how do you get everybody comfortable with the debate? And you don't have to be front and centre in the debate. You can naturally be yourself. But who in the room can you rely on to maybe lead a conversation or talk more about the conversation? So as the introvert, can you cue players in the room to get the conversation going? And I used to use 1 or 2 people in the room to lead a conversation on some difficult issues. Anik, who was head of communications of the corporate relations, was an outgoing, crazy sort of character that we would agree would lead certain conversations to draw individuals into the conversations and maybe challenge some of the quieter members of the organisation. So it wouldn't be me, but we do that from time to time to get the conversation up. And so I'd ask people to lead parts of the conversation, because if the CEO is dominating, then nobody gets a vote in. So different ways of getting people into the debate.
Yeah. So what I hear you primarily talking about there is ensuring that everybody is part of the conversation, not just the extrovert, but actually, even if you're an introvert, how do you bring either yourself out as an introvert or enable other introverts to share as well? Are there any other aspects of inclusion that you would cover?
Yeah. Again, being deliberate when you know people won't say much, being deliberate and trying to cue them in to give them the opportunity, but also in what you do on a daily basis, even the smallest things. I use this as an example just purely to demonstrate the point. If I was going to the toilet and in the executive offices, the toilet was just around the corner, I'd take the long way around the office.
Right.
Because you'd see people and you're accessible and you'd stop and have a chat. So use every opportunity, irrespective of what you're doing, to be engaged, to be seen, to chat, to say hello. And there are all sorts of different ways you can engage, but also encourage the idea of talking and meeting and chatting. Right. And quite often it's those corridor conversations that ended up being some of the most important in terms of what's happening in the organisation. So deliberately being accessible and people being comfortable talking.
Just briefly,
really
I know when we were preparing as well, just briefly, if you could just touch on the neurodiversity piece and maybe also when we talk about gender.
Yeah, so I say quite openly that at Anglo, we had probably two or three individuals that thought very differently to the group. And at the higher level in the organisation, let's be clear. If you've got a highly capable executive, the odds are 30% will be neurodiverse
Yeah.
by their very nature.
Yeah.
How you make sure you're getting their inputs into the meeting is very much about knowing the individual and understanding how and when they're comfortable, or when they do engage, if it's really clunky and difficult or maybe even offensive for others, how do you make sure that what might be a difficult moment is balanced? So as a CEO, you've got to play a little bit of the balance.
Yeah.
The team used to laugh, and I don't think you'd mind this. They have a book of Marxisms, and from Anglo, and one of them is what Tony's scratching at. And one of my colleagues, who is a brilliant thinker, but he comes at things at a very different angle, and he'd sort of throw something out, and everybody would go cross-eyed looking at him. And then I go, well, what Tony's scratching at is, and they'd all laugh because it's me interpreting for everybody what he was, the point he was making. So it ended up getting into the book of Marxism. But your job is that when somebody's making a different point that's not fully understood, how do you either help them or set context or provide a bit of support in the nature of the conversation? Or if there's a relationship that's been bruised, then you do have to make sure that that's managed appropriately and that it's done. The other thing we talked about once before was something I didn't fully recognise while in role, but I did a piece of work with the Canadian Institute of Mining, and we talked about inclusion and diversity, and we had a great speech from a lady that was talking about why gender diversity and doing things in the workplace in terms of gender versus other inclusion, whether it's ethnicity, it could be religious, it could be those sorts of things. There's more a conversation around values and beliefs is one thing. But in the case of gender diversity, you've got a physiological set of circumstances that require quite a different consideration, which includes different roles in society. That if you just say inclusion and diversity and just say everybody's the same, or anybody where we're dealing with that issue in the workplace, gender diversity is far more complex and requires a lot more physical change in the workplace to actually deal with the issues. I don't think I fully appreciate that as much as I should have in most of my executive career. It was only towards late in the period that we'd really started to think deeply, I think, about changing that whole setup in the workplace. And I've seen some very good stuff in the last 2 or 3 years on that, which I think would have been really helpful for me as an executive.
Yeah. I think what stands out to me in your answer is just the level of awareness, how different we all are, whether it's physiology or even whether it's how our brains work, which is still an aspect of physiology, but nevertheless, and then how you as a leader ensure you get every voice in the room, and then the skill in being able to translate that voice so that everybody else can understand it. I think that's fascinating. We're going to go to questions now. We've got a question from Judith. I'm just going to read out the questions if that's okay, because it might probably save some time. But so a question from Judith. Hi, Mark. Very insightful discussion so far. My question is, what was the most challenging boardroom decision you've ever been a part of? And what did you learn from it? What a question.
Probably the most difficult single decision we had to make, or I had to make, was around at Anglo Gold Ashanti. We had the largest gold hedge book in the world.
What does that mean? For those that are not from mining, what does
just to
that mean?
explain it. Yep. So we, as a gold producer, we produced about 4.5 million ounces of gold a year. 12.5 million ounces of gold had been forward sold at a price of $350 an ounce. And
Right.
the gold price was already $650 an ounce and going up. So basically what that meant, for us to satisfy the contract, that is, we committed to give gold at 350, we would have to buy gold at 600 and deliver it to someone at a price of 350. So that essentially meant we had debt that was climbing very quickly.
Big debt.
Against a volatile gold price. And at that time, that meant that debt, or that notional debt, was worth about $6 or $7 billion of the business. Now, we're a company at the time that had a market cap of about 17 billion. And so we were there saying, look, I said to the board, there is a good chance that the gold price is going to keep going. And if we don't do something, that debt could be 12 billion, 15 billion. There is no Anglo Gold Ashanti. That was one. But the counterpoint to that was, oh yes, but the price could go down. And if it went back down, the debt shrunk and you could deal with it quite readily. And the conventional wisdom was, don't try and guess the gold price. You should just don't do any more hedging and just stick with what it was. And that the board was split. And when I presented, they'd always presented, and this was in my first 12 months of being there, they'd always had this story, okay, if the price goes up or if the price stays down, you're okay. What I was able to show the board was that if the price went up, bigger problem. But what I was also able to show them, if the price stayed where it was, no shareholder would invest in us, because Ian Cockrell at Goldfields was telling everybody there's no upside in Anglo's share price. You should just buy Goldfields shares. So I said, our share price is going nowhere. If anything, it's going to go down as a consequence. So staying as we are doesn't fix it. And then I said, if the price of gold goes down, because we've hedged at such a low level, the other gold we produce that does make money won't be sufficient to cover even that smaller debt. So we still got a massive problem. So it doesn't matter where the gold price goes. So in the end, that got all but one board member across the line. And it was a long debate. And at the end of it, the final board member, who ended up going on to be a big chairman in a big organisation, said to me, I can't agree with that. You're trying to pick the gold price. I'm going to have to resign if that's the decision you make. And in the end, that was the decision we made as a board. We lost one board member as a consequence. Interestingly, the gold price went to $1,900 an ounce. If we hadn't have spent, and it ended up costing us $7 billion, just that one call, but the gold price went to $1,900 an ounce. So the out of the money position would have been $19 billion. We would have been dead. And by the way, I get people ringing me now saying, you know how much we'd have been out of the money today on a $5,000 gold price? It's about $50 billion. That's probably the best economic decision anybody's ever made in the business. But at the time, you didn't know. You just didn't know. It could have gone either way. And so,
I mean, you've described a very clear process there. But for you personally, what was the emotional, psychological cost, just in 20 seconds of dealing with that challenge?
Well, it was such a difficult conversation in the board. I knew it would be a difficult conversation because 50% of the board would not want to take out the hedging under any circumstances.
So what was
because
personal for you personally, like to drive through that result? Like, what was the cost for you personally?
It damaged the relationship with certain board members.
Right.
And so how you managed that and how you were respectful, but at the end of the day could disagree,
Right.
was the hard piece of that. Again, I didn't, for me, the business decision ultimately was, I thought, fairly straightforward in the end, but I knew people would struggle with the idea that it's unlikely the price was going to go down. So,
yeah. So got some more questions here as well. Got a question from Bridginette. How do you strike the right balance between being transparent about, I like this question. How do you strike the right balance between being transparent about challenges and maintaining confidence in leadership when presenting to a board? Great question. The balance between being transparent and the challenges whilst maintaining confidence in your leadership.
And I think the question around challenges is, can you connect the strategy and the approach you're taking in the business with how they will help you resolve the challenges you're dealing with? If there's a total disconnect between the two, so if you go into, let's say, an Anglo-American, or Vale is a good example, where we had to do a major transformation, and so you're talking about all these big issues, but if you could then connect those to our strategy and the 5 key things we need to do, we'll actually address those in a particular way. And so the resolution of those big issues is consistent with the strategy. You're in a good place. The question then is, how quickly, what's the pace? Is the next board meeting going to show you've made progress? But if you're talking about your issues and you're talking about the same issues after 18 months, there's a good chance you're in trouble. And so that transparency, the actions that you're putting forward, are they consistent? And then demonstrating you're making progress is key.
Yes.
If you're not making progress and that becomes the same story, then you need to change your approach. Now that draws another point. Is that a weakness because you're not going to get every one of those right. So that transparency point, yes, we can fix it. These are the things we're doing. It's consistent with the strategy and it seems to be working. Or, we've used the tools we've got. We don't seem to be fixing it. At what point do you then say, and I think we've got to change our approach, which may have an impact on the strategy? Those conversations need to remain live. And as a chief executive, the board will judge you on your ability to turn left or right, not every week changing your position, but explaining where you are, explaining that you might have a question on that, but you're going to do a little bit more work and come back to them at the next meeting. So demonstrating you know what's working. Yes. You're not sure on some stuff, so you're monitoring, or something that's not working, you're taking direct action. Right. So you need to answer those 3 dimensions in that question.
Yeah. So you're clear to the challenge, but you're also clear in terms of the strategy to address it, and that's aligned with what the company's trying to do. I've got questions are flying in here.
I'd say,
go on.
Aligned. Those pieces are working, and they're clearly working.
Right.
These pieces, the jury's still out, so this is how we're monitoring and how I'm going to report back. And this is not working, and I've got 3 points. And if that continues, I'm going to make a change, and this is what it may look like. So you deal with those 3 dimensions. That, I think, gives the board more comfort that it's not one stop. You're thinking about the business, and you can be flexible.
Yes. So we've got about 3 or 4 minutes left before we go to the Net Promoter Score and summarize. So 30-second answers on these, Mark. So Audrey Billy, thank you for your question. She asks, when things get politically complicated, how do you stay grounded in your values while still shaping the outcome?
Talking to the team and making sure that you're supporting each other. And if you're not sure of an issue or you have a question or somebody's done something that made you think, ask your team and talk it through with your team. That's what a team does. And be part of the team and be open and be vulnerable at times if you need to be.
Thank you. So get your team involved and stay vulnerable. Tracy Marshall, you spoke about the importance of sponsorship. Do you have any suggestions or strategies for how to identify a potential sponsor and then cultivate the relationship?
I would always think of someone who I thought was capable, but also open, and work with someone that I thought would give me honest feedback and honest and constructive feedback. So you didn't want somebody that just looked across and didn't really spend the time. So capable, someone that you knew or you thought knew the business pretty well and was good with people generally, but someone you could rely on to give you honest feedback and that would genuinely give you a bit of time to help you with the coaching.
All right. And just straight out ask.
Oh yeah. I think very very rare for people to say no. I'm not going to help you. I mean, in the organisations that I've been involved in, mentoring is a very specific an accountability for executives. Yes. For once removed, people working once removed. So we had a very structured process that I thought was really important. But occasionally, when somebody's maybe looking for some help on a particular area, forget the organisation structures. If so-and-so's got something that you'd like to understand and you'd like a little bit of help with, don't hesitate to ask. People aren't going to, generally won't say no.
Yep. Final question, and this is from Fabio Licio. From your experience, and 30-second answer, from your experience, what are the most effective steps to take towards earning a board role early on, and what should someone focus on as they move forward?
So I'm assuming that you're saying you may be in an organisation and you want to get a board role outside the organisation. So the question is, how do you tie that to your own personal development? 1. 2, how might the company benefit from you having exposure to other things that might be useful for the board? So if you're putting a case to the company on having that type of experience, then I think you've got to look at both sides and make sure you put the case. But again, I've always been supportive of executives having at least one external role or board role. And whilst not always worried too much if it had a benefit to the company, but I'd like to think that they were thinking of how they may be able to improve their inputs at the business is always very helpful.
Yes. And just on that point, we actually have a WeQual board readiness program, which is a super practical program. We're running it in Q1 next year, so the beginning of 2026. I'm just going to quickly share the website. I'm not trying to sell to you here, but if you go to wequal.com, click on board readiness, you will see the detail for our board readiness program, and including what's included in terms of some masterclasses of board resume, for the exact reason that Mark is sharing here, because we genuinely believe that if you're a senior leader looking to progress and increase your influence and impact, gaining a board role in an external company supports your own professional development whilst also bringing expertise back into your own company. Can we quickly just launch the Net Promoter poll? So this gives us direct feedback, and then we'll do a wrap up. On the basis of today's session, how likely are you to recommend WeQual to a colleague? 10, very likely. 1, not at all. If you can't see the poll on your screen right now and you feel comfortable, please tap in a number into the chat. They go into our into our results. Feedback is so important to us. Based on this session, how likely are you to recommend WeQual to a colleague? If you've got 30 seconds, then there's just 2 follow-up questions as well, or not? No, I think there's just that one today. So I'm just going to give 20 seconds for people to tap out their answers. And I can see in the chat separately, Emma has been very conscientiously and effectively summarizing. I'm going to try and summarize. It's always very difficult to do when sort of live facilitating a session. I'm going to reflect back some of the key things that I've heard, Mark, and maybe there's just a final piece. I think the thing that has stood out to me, and I'm conscious I did the preparation call with you a few days ago as well, but actually, generally speaking, the boards recognize that if you are, as a leader from the organization, presenting to the board, they're actually going to give you a degree of grace. They recognize you're human. They recognize you might be nervous, but they actually want you to speak to the problems and the challenges rather than to what's working really well. And that is not going to be seen through in a bad way. This is not a reflection on you. But what is important is that as you are sharing maybe news that people don't want to hear, or certainly data that you don't want to share, you're aligning that with, and I'm going to try and come back to those 3 points that you were saying. Here's what's working well. Here's the bit we're not sure of. The jury's still out. And here is where really we need some support or some help. Here's 2 or 3 areas that we're going to try and do something different, but I invite questions. At this point, Mark, please jump back in because you will have greater clarity on that.
Yeah, I think you summarised it extremely well. I think the only thing I would add at the end of the day is be yourself.
Yeah.
Don't be scared to be yourself,
Yes.
because you're in that role because people have seen something in you, and you're presenting because they see potential. So don't question why you're there. You are there. You deserve to be there, and be as comfortable as you can be. I know it's difficult and maybe stressful, but the most important thing, be yourself, and don't be scared to be yourself. Period.
I love that. This was a WeQual executive session. We run 4 or 5 of these sessions every single month. If you're not a member, please do reach out. It's been a pleasure spending this time with you all today, wherever you are in the world. Mark, thank you so much, as ever. I love the openness and the comfort that even I feel when I'm talking to you. So I imagine that was the experience of all of those on all the various leadership teams that you've run. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.